Tonight, we're going to take a peaceful journey into one of the most enchanting secrets hidden beneath our feet. A secret so profound, so quietly revolutionary, that it's changing everything we thought we knew about forests. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the earth. There's something wonderfully comforting about imagining all of us, scattered across time zones, sharing this moment of discovery together. If you find this gentle exploration soothing or fascinating, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps this sleepy little corner of science reach other curious minds who might need a peaceful pause in their day. And I do hope this isn't so captivating that it keeps you awake. Though if it does, at least you'll drift off knowing something extraordinary about the living world around us. Now let me ask you something. When you walk through a forest, what do you see? Towering trees, standing like silent sentinels, each one seemingly isolated in its own space, competing for sunlight, water, and nutrients. Individual soldiers in a quiet battle for survival. That's what scientists thought for decades. That's what textbooks taught. That forests were collections of individual trees, each one fighting its own solitary struggle against the elements and against each other. But what if I told you that everything we believed about forests was wrong? What if those trees, those seemingly separate and independent giants, were actually talking to each other? Not with words or sounds, but through an intricate living network hidden beneath the forest floor. A network so sophisticated, so elegant in its design, that it puts our internet to shame. Picture this for a moment. You're standing in an ancient forest, perhaps among the towering Douglas firs of British Columbia or the majestic oaks of an English woodland. The air is thick with the scent of moss and earth. Dappled sunlight filters through the canopy, and all around you is what appears to be peaceful silence. But beneath your feet, invisible to your eyes, something extraordinary is happening. The trees are talking. They're sharing resources, sending warnings about danger, nurturing their young, and even recognizing their own offspring. They're cooperating in ways that would make the most sophisticated human networks seem simple by comparison. And the most remarkable part? They're doing all of this through a living internet made of fungus. Welcome to the Wood Wide Web, a term that's not just a clever play on words, but a scientific reality that's revolutionizing our understanding of forest ecosystems. This underground network, discovered and studied by pioneering scientists like Professor Suzanne Simard, connects trees across vast distances through hair-thin fungal threads called mycorrhizae. These threads form partnerships with tree roots that are so ancient, so fundamental to life on Earth, that they may have been the very thing that allowed plants to colonize land in the first place, some 400 to 500 million years ago. But let's slow down and start at the beginning, because this story is as much about patience and careful observation as it is about groundbreaking science. The story begins with a young forestry student named Suzanne Simard, working in the forests of British Columbia in the 1980s. She was part of a team investigating why some Douglas fir tree plantations weren't thriving as expected. The conventional wisdom of the time was clear. Remove the competing birch trees, give the valuable Douglas firs more space and resources, and they would flourish. It seemed logical. It seemed obvious. But Simard noticed something peculiar. In the natural, undisturbed forests, Douglas fir seedlings were actually doing better when they were surrounded by birch trees, not worse. The more the birch trees shaded the young firs, the healthier the firs appeared to be. This observation flew in the face of everything she'd been taught about forest competition. So she designed an experiment that would change forestry forever. Using radioactive carbon isotopes as tracers, she could track the movement of carbon through the forest ecosystem. She injected these isotopes into birch trees and waited to see what would happen. What she discovered was revolutionary. The carbon from the birch trees was showing up in the Douglas firs. Not just nearby firs, but firs connected through an underground network of fungal threads. The trees were sharing resources. The birch trees, with their broad leaves and efficient photosynthesis, were actually feeding the shaded Douglas fir seedlings through this hidden network. They weren't competitors, they were partners. But the story gets even more fascinating. Simard discovered that this sharing wasn't random or indiscriminate. The network had intelligence, or at least something that looked remarkably like intelligence. Mother trees, the largest and oldest trees in the forest, were acting as central hubs, connected to dozens of other trees through the fungal network. These ancient giants could recognize their own offspring and preferentially send more resources to their genetic relatives than to unrelated seedlings. When a mother tree was dying, it would download its resources, sending a final gift of carbon, nitrogen, and other nutrients to the young trees around it. It was as if the forest had developed its own version of a will and testament, ensuring that the next generation would have the resources they needed to survive. The mechanism behind all of this is both elegant and ancient. Deep in the soil, invisible to the naked eye, fungal threads called hyphae form intricate webs that connect tree root to tree root. These fungi, called mycorrhizae, form partnerships with trees that benefit both species. The trees provide the fungi with sugars produced through photosynthesis, keeping about 70% for themselves and sharing 30% with their fungal partners. In return, the fungi act as an extension of the tree's root system, reaching into tiny soil spaces that roots cannot access, gathering phosphorus, nitrogen, water, and other essential nutrients. It's a trade agreement that's been in place for hundreds of millions of years, and it's so successful that 80 to 90% of all plant species on Earth participate in these mycorrhizal relationships. The fungi create vast networks that can span entire forests, connecting not just individual trees, but entire communities of plants in a web of mutual support and communication. But how exactly do trees communicate through these networks? The answer lies in chemistry, electrical signals, and molecular messages that scientists are only beginning to decode. When a tree is attacked by insects or infected by disease, it can release specific chemical compounds into the fungal network. These chemical distress signals travel through the hyphal threads to neighboring trees, which respond by ramping up their own defense mechanisms. Imagine for a moment that you're a Douglas fir tree under attack by bark beetles. You detect the damage and immediately begin producing defensive compounds, but you also send a chemical SOS through the fungal network. Your message travels through the underground web to your neighbors. Danger, bark beetles, prepare your defenses. The receiving trees respond by increasing their production of toxic compounds and resin, making themselves less appealing to the attacking insects. This early warning system has been demonstrated in controlled experiments. In one remarkable study, researchers connected Douglas fir and ponderosa pine seedlings using only fungal networks with no direct root contact. When they introduced leaf-eating insects to the Douglas fir, the ponderosa pine began producing defensive compounds within 48 hours, even though it had never been directly attacked. The trees were talking to each other through their fungal partners. The chemical vocabulary of this underground communication is surprisingly sophisticated. Trees can send signals about drought stress, pathogen attacks, nutrient deficiencies, and even seasonal changes. Some of these signals are specific enough that trees can distinguish between different types of threats and respond accordingly. But it's not just about defense. The network also facilitates resource sharing on a scale that challenges our understanding of competition in nature. During different seasons, different tree species take turns being the primary providers. In spring, when birch trees leaf out early and begin photosynthesis, while conifers are still dormant, the birch trees become net contributors to the network. Later in the season, when the conifers are at peak photosynthesis and the birch leaves are declining. The flow reverses. This seasonal sharing creates a form of temporal diversity in the forest, where different species contribute their strengths at different times, creating a more resilient and stable ecosystem overall. It's as if the forest has developed its own version of a seasonal economy, with different species contributing and withdrawing resources based on their capabilities and needs throughout the year. The network also demonstrates a form of ecological memory. When environmental stresses occur, the patterns of resource sharing and communication can persist even after the immediate stress has passed. This means that the forest can essentially learn from experience, developing more efficient responses to recurring challenges. Research has shown that forests with more diverse mycorrhizal networks are more resilient to disturbances like drought, disease outbreaks, and even climate change. The redundancy built into these networks means that if one pathway is disrupted, others can compensate. It's similar to how the internet routes around damaged connections, but this system evolved naturally over millions of years. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond academic curiosity. Understanding the Wood Wide Web is changing how we manage forests, how we think about conservation, and even how we approach reforestation efforts. Traditional forestry practices that treated forests as collections of individual trees competing for resources are being replaced by approaches that recognize and protect the underground networks that hold forest communities together. When foresters began clear-cutting areas and replanting them with single species, they unknowingly destroyed these ancient networks. The new seedlings, planted in sterile soil without their fungal partners, struggled to establish themselves. Survival rates were low, growth was slow, and the resulting forests were less resilient to pests and diseases. But when reforestation efforts began incorporating an understanding of mycorrhizal networks, success rates improved dramatically. By inoculating seedlings with appropriate fungi and maintaining patches of existing forest to serve as network hubs, forest managers could help new plantations establish more quickly and develop greater resilience. The story of the Wood Wide Web is still being written. New discoveries are being made regularly, revealing ever more sophisticated aspects of this underground communication system. Scientists have found evidence of electrical signals traveling through the networks, voltage-based communication systems that operate similarly to nervous systems in animals. They've discovered that some fungi can form partnerships with hundreds of different plant species simultaneously, creating incredibly diverse and stable networks. There's even evidence that the networks can influence forest succession, with established trees using the fungal connections to influence which species of seedlings are most likely to establish successfully in different locations. It's as if the forest is actively managing its own composition and structure through these underground connections. As we continue to explore this hidden world beneath our feet, we're discovering that forests are far more than collections of individual trees. They're superorganisms, communities of interconnected life forms that share resources, information, and even, in a sense, intelligence. The Wood Wide Web reveals that cooperation, not just competition, is a fundamental force in nature. This understanding is changing not just how we see forests, but how we understand life itself. The boundaries between individual organisms become blurred when we realize how intimately connected they are through these underground networks. A forest begins to look less like a collection of separate trees and more like a single, vast living entity with millions of interconnected parts. The next time you walk through a forest, remember that beneath your feet lies one of the most sophisticated communication networks on Earth. Every step you take passes over millions of fungal threads, carrying messages between trees, sharing resources, and maintaining the delicate balance that keeps the forest alive and thriving. But this is just the beginning of our journey into the Wood Wide Web. We've barely scratched the surface of this underground universe, and there are so many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. In the next part of our exploration, we'll dive deeper into the specific mechanisms of this fungal internet, meet the remarkable scientists who are decoding its mysteries, and discover how this ancient network might hold keys to addressing some of our most pressing environmental challenges. The forest is talking, and we're finally learning how to listen. The deeper we venture into this underground realm, the more extraordinary the discoveries become. Scientists have found that the fungal networks connecting trees operate with a level of sophistication that rivals our most advanced computer systems, yet they do so with an organic elegance that took millions of years to perfect. Let's take a moment to truly appreciate the scale of what we're talking about. A single teaspoon of forest soil contains miles of fungal threads, invisible to the naked eye but bustling with activity. These microscopic highways carry not just nutrients and water, but complex molecular messages that coordinate the behavior of entire forest ecosystems. It's as if every handful of earth contains a piece of a vast biological internet, pulsing with information and life. The fungi themselves are remarkable organisms, neither plant nor animal, but something uniquely their own. They exist primarily as these thread-like structures called hyphae, so thin that hundreds could fit through the eye of a needle, yet so strong and persistent that they can push through solid rock over time. When these hyphae encounter tree roots, something magical happens. They don't just touch the roots, they integrate with them, forming structures so intimate that it becomes difficult to say where the fungus ends and the tree begins. There are two main ways this integration occurs, and each creates different types of networks with their own characteristics. In what scientists call ectomycorrhizal relationships, the fungal threads wrap around the tree roots like a living sheath, threading between the root cells but never penetrating them. This type of partnership is common in the temperate and boreal forests of the northern hemisphere, connecting species like pines, firs, oaks, and birches in vast networks that can span entire watersheds. The other type, called arbuscular mycorrhizae, involves fungi that actually penetrate into the root cells themselves, forming intricate tree-like structures inside the living tissue of the plant. This is the more ancient form of partnership, and it's the type that connects the vast majority of plants on Earth, from tropical rainforests to prairie grasslands. Both types of networks function as biological marketplaces, but they operate on currencies that we're only beginning to understand. The primary currency is carbon, in the form of sugars that trees produce through photosynthesis. But the networks also trade in nitrogen, phosphorus, water, and dozens of other nutrients and minerals. They exchange information in the form of chemical signals, electrical pulses, and even hormonal messages that can influence the growth and behavior of connected plants. What makes this biological marketplace so fascinating is that it operates on principles that seem to defy simple economic logic. Trees will sometimes give resources to competitors, support the growth of different species, and even provide aid to plants that offer nothing in return. It's as if the network operates on a form of enlightened self-interest, where the health of the whole system takes precedence over the immediate needs of individual participants. Dr. Suzanne Simard's research revealed that this apparent altruism has deep evolutionary roots. Her experiments showed that mother trees, those ancient giants that serve as network hubs, don't just randomly distribute resources. They show clear preferences, sending more carbon and nutrients to their own offspring than to unrelated seedlings. But they also support other species that contribute to the overall health and stability of the forest ecosystem. This preferential sharing creates what scientists call kin recognition networks. Somehow, through chemical signals traveling through the fungal connections, trees can distinguish their genetic relatives from strangers. Mother Douglas firs will pump extra resources to their own seedlings while also supporting paper birch trees that provide crucial nitrogen and other nutrients to the soil. It's a form of biological nepotism balanced by ecological wisdom. The implications of this discovery ripple outward in ways that challenge our fundamental assumptions about how nature works. If trees can recognize their relatives and preferentially support them, What does that say about the nature of plant intelligence? If forests operate as integrated systems that balance competition with cooperation, how should that change our approach to conservation and forest management? These questions become even more intriguing when we consider the temporal dimension of forest networks. The fungal partnerships that connect trees can persist for centuries, creating a form of ecological memory that spans multiple tree generations. When an old-growth forest is disturbed, the surviving network fragments retain information about the species composition, nutrient cycles, and stress responses that characterized the original ecosystem. This biological memory helps explain why old-growth forests are so difficult to replicate through traditional reforestation methods. It's not enough to plant the right species of trees in the right proportions. The underground network that connects them and coordinates their interactions takes decades or centuries to develop fully. Without these fungal partnerships, planted forests remain collections of individual trees rather than integrated ecosystems. Recent research has revealed that the networks can even influence the physical structure of forests. Mother trees have been observed altering their root architecture to make space for their offspring, creating gaps in their own root systems that allow young trees to establish more easily. The fungal networks appear to coordinate this process, somehow communicating information about optimal spacing and resource allocation across the forest floor. The chemical communication system that operates through these networks is staggeringly complex. Scientists have identified hundreds of different compounds that trees can release into the fungal network, each one carrying specific information about the tree's condition, needs, or environmental challenges. Some of these chemicals are distress signals, warning of insect attacks or disease outbreaks. Others are resource requests, indicating shortages of particular nutrients or water stress. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery is that trees can send preemptive signals through the network, preparing their neighbors for challenges that haven't yet arrived. When a tree detects the early stages of a drought, it can send chemical messages that prompt nearby trees to begin conserving water and adjusting their metabolism. When the first signs of an insect outbreak appear, trees can warn their neighbors to begin producing defensive compounds before the pests arrive. This early warning system operates with a speed and efficiency that puts human communication networks to shame. Chemical signals can travel through fungal networks at rates of several centimeters per hour, fast enough to alert trees across an entire forest stand within days of a threat being detected. The receiving trees can begin their defensive responses immediately, often successfully repelling attacks that would have been devastating if they had arrived without warning. The network also facilitates more subtle forms of communication. Trees experiencing seasonal changes can signal the appropriate timing for dormancy, leaf drop, or spring awakening to their neighbors. Young trees can receive information about optimal growth patterns and resource allocation strategies from their elders. Even information about local soil conditions, water availability, and microclimate variations can be shared through the fungal connections. But the Wood Wide Web isn't just about tree-to-tree communication. The fungi themselves are active participants in these networks, not just passive conduits for tree messages. They have their own needs, preferences, and strategies for survival. They can choose which trees to connect, how much resources to provide to different partners, and even which chemical messages to relay or filter. This three-way relationship between trees, fungi, and the network itself creates dynamics that scientists are still struggling to understand. Sometimes the fungi appear to act as neutral facilitators, helping trees share resources and information for the benefit of the entire forest community. Other times, they seem to act more like brokers, taking larger shares of resources from trees that are thriving and redistributing them to partners that offer better returns on investment. The fungi can even play favorites, forming stronger partnerships with trees that are more generous with their carbon donations, or that provide rare nutrients that are in high demand. This creates a form of biological market economy, where trees must balance their own needs with their contributions to the network if they want to maintain access to the system's benefits. These complex relationships help explain why forest ecosystems are so resilient to disturbance and so efficient at utilizing available resources. The underground networks create redundancy and flexibility that allows forests to adapt to changing conditions, recover from damage, and maintain stability even as individual trees live and die. As we've learned more about these networks, we've discovered that they extend far beyond what we initially imagined. Some fungal networks span hundreds of acres, connecting thousands of trees across entire landscapes. The largest documented networks rival human cities in their complexity, with major highways carrying high volumes of resources and information between distant forest neighborhoods, and smaller local networks handling more intimate community communications. The networks also connect across species boundaries in ways that create unexpected partnerships. Coniferous and deciduous trees, which were long thought to be competitors for forest resources, often turn out to be collaborators connected through shared fungal networks. The conifers provide steady carbon inputs throughout the year, while the deciduous trees contribute seasonal pulses of nutrients and help create favorable soil conditions. These cross-species partnerships create forests that are more diverse, more productive, and more resilient than single-species plantations. They help explain why natural forests typically outperform tree farms in terms of carbon storage, biodiversity, and resistance to pests and diseases. The underground networks allow different species to specialize in different ecological roles while sharing the benefits of their various contributions. But perhaps most remarkably, recent research has suggested that the networks may facilitate evolutionary processes within forest communities. By allowing trees to share resources and information across species boundaries, the fungal networks create opportunities for genetic exchange and adaptation that wouldn't be possible in isolated populations. Trees connected to diverse networks show greater genetic diversity and more rapid adaptation to environmental changes than those growing in isolation. The networks appear to create evolutionary advantages, not just for individual trees, but for entire forest communities, helping them respond more effectively to climate change, new pathogens, and other challenges. As our understanding of these underground networks deepens, we're beginning to realize that the Wood Wide Web represents something far more profound than we initially suspected. It's not just a communication system or a resource-sharing network. It's a form of collective intelligence that emerges from the interactions of millions of individual organisms working together toward common goals. This biological internet has been operating beneath our feet for millions of years, quietly coordinating the activities of forest ecosystems with a sophistication that we're only beginning to appreciate. Every forest walk, every quiet moment among the trees, takes place above one of the most complex and elegant information systems on Earth. The story continues to unfold as scientists develop new tools and techniques for studying these hidden networks. Advanced molecular techniques allow researchers to trace the movement of specific compounds through fungal connections in real time. Sophisticated imaging technologies reveal the intricate architecture of the underground networks. Computer models help scientists understand how information and resources flow through these biological systems. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, revealing new layers of complexity and beauty in the Wood Wide Web. We're learning that the networks can store information, process signals, and make decisions in ways that seem to blur the boundaries between individual organisms and collective intelligence. The ancient forests that harbor the most complex networks are increasingly recognized as irreplaceable repositories of biological information and evolutionary wisdom. They represent millions of years of network development and refinement, creating systems of stunning complexity and resilience that we're only beginning to understand. As we stand at the threshold of this underground universe, we're faced with profound questions about the nature of intelligence, communication, and cooperation in the natural world. The Wood Wide Web challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about how ecosystems function and how individual organisms relate to the larger communities of which they are part. The revelations emerging from the Wood Wide Web have sparked heated debates within the scientific community, and it's important that we navigate these discussions with the same careful attention we'd give to any complex natural phenomenon. Like watching fireflies blink in patterns we don't quite understand, the underground networks of forests reveal their secrets slowly, sometimes contradicting what we thought we knew. Some researchers have begun to question whether the popular narrative of forest cooperation tells the complete story. While the evidence for fungal networks connecting trees is undeniable, the interpretation of what these connections actually accomplish has become a subject of gentle scientific disagreement. It's rather like looking at the same constellation and seeing different patterns, depending on your perspective and experience. Dr. Melanie Jones, a forest ecologist who has spent years studying mycorrhizal relationships, suggests that we might be anthropomorphizing the behavior of trees and fungi. When we see carbon moving from one tree to another through fungal connections, she argues, we shouldn't necessarily interpret this as deliberate sharing or caring. Instead, it might simply be the result of natural processes following the path of least resistance, like water flowing downhill. This perspective doesn't diminish the wonder of what's happening underground, but it does invite us to consider alternative explanations. Perhaps what appears to be altruistic sharing is actually a form of biological commerce, where fungi act as traders rather than postal workers, moving resources to where they can command the best prices in terms of carbon and nutrients. The fungi themselves might be the true orchestrators of these networks, managing their tree partners like a shepherd tending a flock. After all, from the fungus's perspective, trees are valuable assets that produce the sugars that keep the fungal network alive and thriving. It would make evolutionary sense for fungi to keep their tree partners healthy and productive, even if that means moving resources between them. This interpretation paints a picture of the Wood Wide Web as less of a cooperative society and more of a sophisticated economy, with fungi serving as both the infrastructure and the market makers. Trees participate not out of altruism, but because the benefits of network membership outweigh the costs of the carbon they must contribute to maintain their fungal partnerships. Some experiments have revealed a darker side to these underground networks. Just as our human internet can be used for both helpful communication and harmful activities, the fungal networks can facilitate competition as well as cooperation. Some plants appear to use the networks to send chemical signals that inhibit the growth of their neighbors, essentially engaging in biological warfare through the very connections that also allow for resource sharing. Certain orchids have been discovered to be what scientists politely call mycoheterotrophs, but which we might more colloquially describe as cheaters. These plants tap into the fungal networks without contributing significant resources in return, essentially stealing carbon from nearby trees through their shared fungal partners. They've evolved to be parasites on the Wood Wide Web, taking advantage of the network without paying their fair share of the maintenance costs. Even among trees that do contribute to the network, there's evidence of preferential treatment that looks less like family care and more like favoritism. While mother trees do send more resources to their genetic offspring, this behavior might be better understood as an evolutionary strategy for propagating their own genes rather than as conscious nurturing behavior. The complexity of these relationships becomes even more apparent when we consider that individual trees can be connected to multiple fungal networks simultaneously, each with its own dynamics and resource flows. A single tree might be cooperating with some neighbors through one network, while competing with others through a different set of fungal connections. It's as if each tree is navigating multiple social circles at once, with different rules and expectations governing each relationship. Recent studies have also revealed that the strength and direction of resource flows through fungal networks can change rapidly in response to environmental conditions. During drought stress, trees that were previously generous contributors to the network might become net receivers, drawing resources from neighbors that are better positioned to access groundwater. When the stress passes, the flow patterns might reverse again or establish entirely new configurations. This dynamic flexibility suggests that the networks are constantly adjusting and rebalancing themselves, responding to changing conditions with a fluidity that makes it difficult to characterize them as either purely cooperative or competitive. They seem to exist in a state of constant negotiation, with the terms of engagement shifting as circumstances change. The seasonal patterns of resource sharing that initially seemed to demonstrate interspecies cooperation might also be reinterpreted through this more nuanced lens. When birch trees provide carbon to Douglas firs in early spring, it might not be because they're being generous to a different species. Instead, it could be that the fungi are simply moving resources from where they're abundant to where they're needed, maintaining the overall health of the system that supports the fungal network itself. Similarly, the warning signals that trees send through fungal networks when under attack might serve the fungi's interests as much as the trees. If one tree in a network dies from pest attack, the fungi lose a valuable partner and source of carbon. By facilitating early warning systems, the fungi help protect their investments, ensuring the continued productivity of their tree partners. This more complex understanding of forest networks doesn't make them less remarkable, but it does make them more realistic. Instead of a utopian society of sharing trees, we see something perhaps more interesting, a complex adaptive system where cooperation and competition coexist, where individual interests and collective benefits are balanced through millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The scientific debate around these interpretations reflects the broader challenge of studying systems that are both incredibly complex and largely hidden from direct observation. Unlike studying animal behavior, where we can watch interactions unfold in real time, forest network research requires us to infer relationships from chemical traces, growth patterns, and carefully controlled experiments. Each experimental approach has its limitations. Greenhouse studies can isolate specific variables but may not reflect the complexity of natural forest conditions. Field experiments are more realistic, but face the challenge of controlling for the countless variables that influence forest ecosystems. Laboratory analysis of fungal DNA can map network connections, but doesn't tell us much about the actual flow of resources or information through those connections. These methodological challenges mean that different research groups, using different approaches, sometimes reach different conclusions about how forest networks function. This isn't a flaw in the scientific process, but rather a reflection of the inherent difficulty of studying systems that operate on spatial and temporal scales far beyond human experience. The ongoing scientific discussion has led to more sophisticated research approaches that attempt to capture the full complexity of forest networks. New technologies allow researchers to track the movement of isotopically labeled compounds through networks in real time, providing more direct evidence of resource flows. Advanced DNA sequencing techniques can identify the specific fungal species involved in different types of networks and map their connections with unprecedented precision. Computer modeling has become an essential tool for understanding how these complex systems might behave under different conditions. By creating mathematical representations of network structures and resource flows, researchers can test hypotheses about network function and predict how forests might respond to various disturbances or management practices. These models are revealing that forest networks may be even more complex than previously imagined, with multiple layers of interaction operating simultaneously. There are fast networks that respond to immediate threats and opportunities, intermediate networks that coordinate seasonal resource flows, and slow networks that operate over decades to shape forest composition and structure. The interplay between these different network scales creates emergent properties that can't be understood by studying any single component in isolation. It's similar to how the behavior of a flock of birds emerges from the interactions of individual birds following simple rules, but the resulting patterns are far more complex than any single bird could create on its own. As our understanding of forest networks continues to evolve, we're learning to appreciate both their cooperative and competitive aspects. The networks facilitate remarkable forms of resource sharing and communication, but they also create opportunities for cheating, manipulation, and conflict. They demonstrate both the power of collective action and the persistence of individual self-interest. This nuanced understanding is actually more useful for forest management and conservation than simpler narratives about either pure competition or pure cooperation. It suggests that healthy forests require diversity, not just in species composition, but in network structures and relationships. Some degree of competition and conflict might actually be necessary for maintaining the dynamic balance that keeps forest ecosystems resilient and adaptable. The practical implications of this research are still being worked out, but they're already influencing how forest managers think about reforestation, harvesting practices, and ecosystem restoration. Instead of focusing solely on tree species and spacing, foresters are beginning to consider the fungal communities that will support those trees and the network structures that will emerge from their interactions. Some innovative forest management approaches now include deliberate inoculation of seedlings with appropriate fungal partners, preservation of network hub trees during selective harvesting, and maintenance of fungal corridor zones that allow networks to persist across managed landscapes. These practices recognize that healthy forests are not just collections of healthy trees, but integrated systems where the connections between trees may be as important as the trees themselves. The story of forest networks also highlights the importance of protecting old-growth forests, not just for their individual ancient trees, but for the complex underground networks they harbor. These networks represent centuries of evolutionary refinement and ecological learning, creating systems of stunning sophistication that we're only beginning to understand. When old-growth forests are destroyed, we lose not just the trees, but the network infrastructure that took centuries to develop. Replanting trees in these areas is like trying to rebuild the internet by setting up computers without any of the cables, servers, or protocols that allow them to communicate with each other. As we continue to study these hidden networks, we're discovering that the boundary between individual organisms and ecosystems is far more blurred than we once believed. Trees exist not as isolated individuals, but as participants in vast biological communities that extend far beyond what we can see above ground. This realization is changing how we think about forests, but it's also influencing our understanding of other ecosystems. Researchers are finding similar network structures in grasslands, deserts, and even aquatic environments, suggesting that fungal networks might be a fundamental organizing principle of life on Earth. The Wood Wide Web reveals that cooperation and competition are not opposing forces in nature, but complementary aspects of complex adaptive systems. The most successful forests are those that have found ways to balance individual needs with collective benefits, creating networks that are both robust and flexible, competitive and cooperative, efficient and resilient. As we stand among the trees, whether in an ancient forest or a city park, we can now appreciate that we're witnessing just the visible portion of one of Earth's most sophisticated information systems. Beneath our feet, conversations are happening, resources are being shared and traded, alliances are being formed and dissolved, and the collective intelligence of the forest is quietly managing the complex business of staying alive and thriving. The Wood Wide Web continues to reveal its secrets slowly, like a vast library written in a language we're still learning to read. Each discovery opens new questions. Each answer reveals new mysteries, and each forest walk becomes an opportunity to contemplate the hidden connections that bind all life together. In our next exploration, we'll venture even deeper into this underground universe, meeting more of the remarkable scientists who are decoding the language of trees and discovering how this ancient network might hold keys to some of our most pressing environmental challenges. The conversation between trees continues, and we're finally learning how to listen. But the revelations of the Wood Wide Web extend far beyond the boundaries of any single forest. As researchers began to map these fungal networks across different continents and ecosystems, they discovered that the underground Internet of Trees operates on scales that boggle the imagination. Some networks stretch across entire mountain ranges, connecting forests separated by valleys, rivers, and human settlements in ways that suggest a form of biological continuity that transcends the landscape features we use to define forest boundaries. In the boreal forests of Canada and Scandinavia, scientists have traced fungal networks that span hundreds of square kilometers, linking spruce, fir, and birch trees in connections that can persist for centuries. These vast networks create what researchers now call biological superhighways, major fungal arteries that carry resources and information across continental scales. A single fungal organism, invisible to the naked eye but extending through millions of hairline threads, can connect more trees than there are people in a small city. The discovery of these continental-scale networks has profound implications for how we understand forest resilience and climate adaptation. When a local forest experiences drought, disease outbreak, or other environmental stress, it can potentially draw support from connected forests hundreds of kilometers away. Resources can flow from regions where conditions are favorable to areas where trees are struggling, creating a form of biological insurance system that operates across entire bioregions. Dr. Peter Wohlleben, a German forester turned researcher, has documented examples of this long-distance resource sharing in European beech forests. He describes finding ancient stumps, cut decades ago, that are still alive today, sustained entirely by resources flowing through fungal networks from surrounding trees. These zombie stumps, as they're sometimes called, demonstrate the extraordinary commitment that forest networks show to maintaining their members, even those that can no longer contribute to the collective photosynthetic effort. This discovery challenges our basic assumptions about what it means for a tree to be alive or dead. If a tree can survive without leaves, without the ability to photosynthesize, sustained entirely by the generosity of its neighbors through fungal connections, then the boundaries of individual identity become remarkably fluid. The forest begins to resemble a single vast organism with many parts, some of which may be temporarily inactive, but remain connected to the living whole. The temporal scales on which these networks operate are equally astounding. While we often think of forests in terms of human lifespans, the fungal networks that connect them operate on geological timescales. Some of the largest fungal organisms on Earth are estimated to be thousands of years old, persisting through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and countless cycles of forest growth and disturbance. In Oregon, researchers have identified a single fungal organism covering over 2,000 acres, and estimated to be between 2,400 and 8,650 years old. This ancient network has witnessed the rise and fall of countless tree generations, maintaining continuity through environmental changes that would challenge any individual organism. It represents a form of biological memory that spans millennia, carrying information about climate patterns, soil conditions, and ecosystem dynamics across time periods that dwarf human history. These ancient networks serve as libraries of ecological knowledge, storing information about successful survival strategies, optimal resource allocation patterns, and effective responses to environmental challenges. When young trees connect to these networks, they gain access not just to resources, but to the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of forest experience. The process by which this information is stored and transmitted through fungal networks is still largely mysterious, but recent research has revealed some fascinating clues. Scientists have discovered that fungi can alter their gene expression in response to environmental conditions, essentially reprogramming themselves based on the signals they receive from their tree partners. These epigenetic changes can persist for extended periods, creating a form of biological memory that allows the network to remember and respond to recurring environmental patterns. When drought conditions occur, for example, the fungal network doesn't just facilitate immediate resource sharing between trees. It also appears to encode information about the drought's duration, intensity, and spatial pattern, creating a template that can be used to coordinate more effective responses to future dry periods. The network learns from experience, becoming more sophisticated and efficient with each challenge it encounters. This learning capacity extends to pathogen resistance as well. When a forest network successfully repels an outbreak of bark beetles or fungal disease, the chemical signatures of that successful defense can persist in the network for years. If similar pathogens appear again, the network can rapidly deploy proven defensive strategies, essentially vaccinating the entire forest community against recurring threats. The sophistication of these defensive systems rivals anything found in human immune systems. Trees connected to mature networks show remarkable abilities to distinguish between different types of threats and deploy appropriate responses. They can differentiate between mechanical damage from wind or animals and biological attacks from insects or pathogens, sending different chemical signals that prompt different defensive responses from their neighbors. Some of the most elegant examples of network-mediated defense come from studies of pine forests under attack by bark beetles. When beetles begin boring into a tree's bark, the tree immediately sends chemical distress signals through the fungal network. Neighboring trees respond by increasing their production of toxic resins and defensive compounds, making themselves less attractive to the spreading beetle population. But the network's response goes beyond simple chemical warfare. The fungal partners can actually alter the nutritional quality of tree tissues, making beetle-infested trees less nutritious for the insects, while simultaneously making uninfested trees more robust and resistant. It's as if the network coordinates a community-wide defensive strategy, sacrificing already compromised members while strengthening the defenses of those that can still be saved. These coordinated responses operate with a precision that suggests sophisticated information processing capabilities within the fungal networks. The fungi appear to integrate signals from multiple trees, assess the overall threat level, and coordinate responses that optimize the survival chances of the network as a whole. Individual trees may be sacrificed for the greater good, but the network persists and adapts. The electrical signaling systems that operate within these networks add another layer of complexity to their communication capabilities. Researchers have measured voltage changes that travel through fungal hyphae at speeds comparable to nerve impulses in simple animals. These electrical signals can coordinate rapid responses across network nodes, allowing forests to react to threats or opportunities with surprising speed. Dr. Monica Galliano's research has revealed that these electrical signals can encode complex information about environmental conditions, resource availability, and even seasonal timing cues. The networks appear to use electrical pulses to synchronize activities across connected trees, ensuring that leaf-out, reproduction, and dormancy occur at optimal times for the forest community as a whole. The implications of electrical signaling in plant networks have sparked intense scientific debate about the nature of plant intelligence and consciousness. While most researchers are careful to avoid anthropomorphizing plant behavior, the sophistication of network responses challenges traditional boundaries between plant and animal cognition. Some scientists propose that fungal networks might represent a form of distributed intelligence, where complex behaviors emerge from the interactions of many simple components. Like the neurons in a brain or the nodes in a computer network, individual fungi and trees might contribute to collective decision-making processes that transcend the capabilities of any single organism. This distributed intelligence manifests in remarkable ways during forest succession. When disturbances create openings in the forest canopy, the underground networks appear to coordinate the establishment of new vegetation in patterns that optimize long-term forest stability. Certain species are encouraged in specific locations, while others are suppressed, creating spatial arrangements that maximize resource utilization and minimize competitive conflicts. The networks also facilitate what ecologists call assisted migration, helping tree species adapt to changing climate conditions by supporting the establishment of new populations outside their traditional ranges. As temperature and precipitation patterns shift, fungal networks can extend their connections to support pioneering trees in locations that are becoming climatically suitable, effectively helping forests migrate to track optimal growing conditions. This assisted migration occurs over timescales much longer than human observation periods, but genetic analysis of forest populations reveals clear patterns of network-facilitated range expansion. Tree species that are strongly connected to mycorrhizal networks show greater success in establishing new populations under changing climate conditions compared to species that rely more heavily on wind or animal dispersal. The role of fungal networks in climate adaptation extends beyond simple migration assistance. The networks appear to buffer forest communities against climate extremes by facilitating resource sharing during stress periods and maintaining genetic diversity through long-distance pollen and seed dispersal connections. During severe drought years, trees connected to extensive fungal networks show better survival rates and faster recovery compared to isolated individuals. The networks can mobilize water resources from deep soil layers and distant locations, essentially creating biological watersheds that extend far beyond surface drainage patterns. Similarly, during periods of extreme cold or heat, the networks facilitate resource sharing that helps trees maintain critical metabolic functions, even when local conditions would normally be lethal. Trees at the edges of their tolerance ranges can survive in locations where they would normally perish, supported by resources flowing through underground connections to more favorably situated partners. These climate buffering effects suggest that fungal networks might be crucial for maintaining forest stability as global climate patterns continue to shift. Forests with intact underground networks may prove far more resilient to climate change than fragmented landscapes where these connections have been disrupted by human activities. The conservation implications of this research are staggering. Traditional approaches to forest protection focused on preserving individual trees, or stands, but network research suggests that we need to think in terms of preserving connected landscapes that maintain the integrity of underground communication systems. Corridors of intact forest that allow fungal networks to persist across human-modified landscapes may be as important as the protected areas they connect. Roads, agricultural fields, and urban development don't just fragment above-ground habitat. They sever underground connections that took decades or centuries to establish. Some innovative conservation approaches now focus on maintaining what researchers call network connectivity across landscapes. This involves identifying critical network nodes, protecting fungal highways that connect distant forest patches, and designing human land uses that minimize disruption to underground communication systems. The restoration of degraded forests is also being revolutionized by network research. Instead of simply replanting trees, restoration projects now focus on re-establishing the fungal partnerships and network connections that will allow new forests to integrate with existing regional networks. Some of the most successful reforestation projects now begin not with tree planting, but with soil inoculation programs that introduce appropriate fungal partners to degraded sites. By establishing the underground infrastructure first, these projects create conditions that allow planted trees to tap into existing network resources and integrate more quickly into forest communities. The economic implications of network research are equally profound. Forest management practices that maintain network integrity show higher long-term productivity, better resistance to pests and diseases, and greater carbon storage capacity compared to approaches that ignore underground connections. Timber harvesting strategies that preserve key network nodes and maintain fungal corridors between harvest units can sustain forest productivity while allowing for continued resource extraction. These approaches recognize that the value of a forest lies not just in its individual trees, but in the network infrastructure that supports forest community function. The carbon storage potential of intact fungal networks has particular relevance for climate change mitigation efforts. Networks facilitate more efficient carbon cycling, deeper soil carbon storage, and better integration of above-ground and below-ground carbon pools. Forests with healthy fungal networks can sequester significantly more carbon per unit area than degraded or fragmented forests. As our understanding of fungal networks continues to expand, we're discovering connections between forest health and human health that operate through pathways we never suspected. The air quality benefits of forests, their role in regulating local climate conditions, and their contributions to watershed protection all depend partly on the underground networks that coordinate forest community function. Some researchers have even begun investigating whether the chemical compounds that travel through fungal networks might have pharmaceutical applications. The complex molecules that trees use to communicate with their fungal partners and coordinate community responses represent millions of years of evolutionary refinement in biological signaling systems. The story of the Wood Wide Web continues to unfold with each new research season, revealing layers of complexity and beauty that challenge our understanding of how life on Earth really works. Every forest walk now carries the knowledge that beneath our feet lies one of the most sophisticated biological systems on the planet, quietly coordinating the activities of one of our most important ecosystems. As we prepare to delve even deeper into this underground universe, we'll explore how cutting-edge research techniques are revealing new secrets of fungal communication. Meet the pioneering scientists who are decoding the language of the forest and discover how this ancient wisdom might help us address some of our most pressing environmental challenges. The trees are still talking, the networks are still humming with activity, and we're only beginning to understand the true scope of the conversations happening beneath our feet. The Wood Wide Web holds secrets that could transform not just how we manage forests, but how we understand our relationship with the living world around us. But perhaps the most extraordinary revelation about these underground networks is how they're forcing us to reconsider what we mean by intelligence itself. When we watch a forest respond to threats, coordinate seasonal changes, and allocate resources across vast landscapes, we're witnessing behaviors that seem to require planning, memory, and decision-making. Yet there's no central brain, no command center orchestrating these activities. Instead, intelligence appears to emerge from the collective interactions of millions of simple components working together. This distributed form of cognition operates on principles that are both alien and familiar. Like the neurons in our own brains, individual fungal threads process simple signals and pass them along to their neighbors. But unlike our centralized nervous systems, forest networks have no single location where decisions are made. Instead, intelligence emerges from the pattern of connections, the flow of information, and the accumulated responses of countless individual interactions. Recent advances in network analysis have allowed scientists to map these fungal connections with unprecedented precision. Using techniques borrowed from neuroscience and computer science, researchers can now visualize the information highways that crisscross forest floors. What they've discovered looks remarkably similar to the neural networks that power artificial intelligence systems, with hub nodes that process high volumes of information and specialized pathways that carry different types of signals. Dr. Francisca de Vries, working in the forests of the Netherlands, has spent years mapping these fungal superhighways. Her research reveals network architectures that would be familiar to any computer scientist. Redundant pathways that provide backup routes when primary connections fail. Hierarchical structures that efficiently distribute information across different scales. And adaptive routing systems that can redirect traffic when parts of the network become congested or damaged. These biological networks demonstrate a form of self-organization that engineers can only dream of achieving. They grow organically, adapting their structure to local conditions while maintaining global connectivity. They repair themselves when damaged, reroute around obstacles, and continuously optimize their performance based on changing environmental demands. No human-designed system has ever achieved this level of autonomous sophistication. The parallels between fungal networks and artificial intelligence systems have sparked collaborations between forest ecologists and computer scientists. Some researchers are using forest network models to develop more robust artificial neural networks, while others are applying machine learning techniques to decode the patterns of communication flowing through fungal connections. These interdisciplinary approaches are revealing that forest networks process information in ways that are both more complex and more elegant than our current AI systems. While artificial networks require enormous amounts of energy and precisely controlled conditions, fungal networks operate efficiently in chaotic natural environments, processing information while simultaneously performing the physical work of nutrient transport and structural support. The energy efficiency of these biological networks is particularly remarkable. A human brain, which processes information at roughly the same rate as a small section of forest network, consumes about 20 watts of power. The equivalent section of fungal network operates on a tiny fraction of that energy, drawing power from the very trees it serves while performing multiple functions simultaneously. This efficiency stems partly from the way biological networks integrate structure and function. The same fungal threads that carry information between trees also transport nutrients, water, and defensive compounds. It's as if our internet cables could also serve as water pipes and electrical conduits, dramatically reducing the infrastructure required to support complex communication systems. The temporal dynamics of forest networks add another layer of sophistication to their information processing capabilities. Unlike digital systems that operate in discrete time steps, fungal networks process information continuously, with signals flowing at different speeds through different pathways. Chemical messages might take hours or days to travel between distant trees, while electrical pulses can traverse local connections in minutes. This multi-timescale processing allows forest networks to integrate information across different temporal scales simultaneously. Rapid electrical signals coordinate immediate responses to threats or opportunities, while slower chemical messages carry information about longer-term environmental trends and seasonal patterns. The network can respond to emergencies while maintaining awareness of broader ecological contexts. Professor Suzanne Simard's recent work has revealed that these temporal layers create a form of biological memory that extends far beyond individual tree lifespans. When environmental patterns repeat across decades or centuries, the network's response becomes more efficient and effective each time. The system learns from experience, encoding successful strategies in the structure and chemistry of the fungal connections themselves. This learning capacity manifests in subtle but measurable ways. Forests that have experienced multiple drought cycles show more efficient water-sharing patterns during subsequent dry periods. Networks that have successfully repelled pest outbreaks deploy defensive strategies more quickly when similar threats reappear. The forest develops a form of institutional memory that transcends the mortality of any individual organism. The implications of this biological learning extend into our understanding of ecosystem stability and resilience. Traditional ecological models assumed that environmental responses were largely determined by the genetic characteristics of individual species, but network research suggests that learned behaviors, encoded in fungal connections and passed down through network generations, play an equally important role in determining how ecosystems respond to environmental challenges. This discovery has profound implications for restoration ecology. When we destroy old-growth forests, we're not just losing individual trees, we're erasing libraries of ecological knowledge that took centuries to accumulate. The fungal networks that connect these ancient forests carry information about optimal responses to drought, pest outbreaks, climate variations, and countless other environmental challenges. Young forests planted on degraded sites lack access to this accumulated wisdom. They must learn from scratch how to coordinate their responses to environmental stresses, often with limited success. This helps explain why replanted forests frequently struggle to match the resilience and productivity of natural systems, even when species composition and planting densities are carefully matched. Some innovative restoration projects are now experimenting with knowledge transfer techniques, attempting to inoculate new forests with fungal networks from nearby old-growth areas. Early results suggest that young trees connected to experienced networks show better survival rates, faster growth, and more sophisticated responses to environmental challenges. These knowledge transfer experiments raise fascinating questions about the nature of ecological inheritance. We're accustomed to thinking about genetic inheritance, where characteristics are passed from parents to offspring through DNA. But network research reveals a parallel system of ecological inheritance, where behaviors and responses are transmitted through fungal connections across multiple generations, and even between different species. This fungal inheritance system operates on different principles than genetic inheritance. Instead of being passed vertically from parent to offspring, ecological knowledge flows horizontally through network connections, allowing trees to learn from neighbors, distant relatives, and even completely different species. A young Douglas fir can inherit drought response strategies from an ancient cedar, or acquire pest resistance techniques from a birch tree on the other side of the forest. The speed at which this horizontal knowledge transfer occurs can be remarkable. Seedlings that connect to established networks can acquire complex behavioral patterns within months or even weeks, dramatically accelerating their adaptation to local conditions. It's as if the forest provides an accelerated education program for young trees, allowing them to skip decades of trial and error learning. This educational function of forest networks helps explain some puzzling observations about tree behavior in different environments. Trees of the same species can show dramatically different responses to similar environmental conditions depending on the networks they're connected to. A Douglas fir growing in isolation might respond to drought stress very differently than a genetically identical tree connected to an experienced network. The educational role of fungal networks also influences forest succession patterns in ways that ecologists are only beginning to understand. Instead of succession being driven purely by competitive interactions and environmental gradients, network-mediated learning appears to guide the establishment and development of plant communities over time. Early successional species don't just modify physical conditions to favor later arrivals, they also establish network connections that can educate incoming species about local conditions and optimal survival strategies. Pioneer trees create not just favorable microclimates, but also information infrastructure that subsequent species can tap into. This network-mediated succession creates more predictable and stable community development compared to purely competitive models. Species that might otherwise struggle to establish in particular environments can succeed when connected to educational networks that provide guidance about local conditions and optimal resource allocation strategies. The role of fungal networks in species coexistence has become another active area of research. Traditional ecological theory struggled to explain how multiple tree species with similar resource requirements could coexist in the same forest. Competition theory suggested that the most efficient species should eventually exclude all others, yet natural forests consistently maintain high species diversity. Network research reveals that fungal connections create opportunities for resource partitioning and niche specialization that aren't apparent from above-ground observations. Different tree species can specialize in accessing different soil resources or responding to different types of environmental variation, sharing their specialized capabilities through network connections. A cedar tree might specialize in accessing deep groundwater, while a nearby maple focuses on capturing nutrients from decomposing leaf litter. Through fungal networks, both trees can benefit from both resource streams, allowing them to coexist despite apparent competition for similar resources. The network creates complementarity where surface observations might suggest only competition. This network-mediated complementarity helps explain the remarkable species richness of old-growth forests. Instead of being limited by competitive exclusion, species diversity can actually increase network stability and efficiency. Each species contributes different capabilities to the collective, and the network coordinates these contributions to optimize overall forest performance. The seasonal dynamics of these multi-species networks create temporal complementarity as well as spatial resource partitioning. Deciduous trees contribute heavily to network resources during their growing season, but become net recipients during winter dormancy. Evergreen species maintain steady resource contributions throughout the year, but may require additional support during periods of peak growth or reproduction. These temporal exchanges create seasonal rhythms in network activity that coordinate forest-wide processes. The timing of leaf-out, reproduction, and senescence across different species becomes synchronized through network connections, optimizing resource utilization and minimizing competitive conflicts throughout the growing season. The coordination extends beyond simple resource sharing to include more complex community-level behaviors. Forest-wide responses to environmental cues like day length, temperature changes, and precipitation patterns are mediated through network connections, allowing entire plant communities to respond as integrated units rather than collections of competing individuals. During autumn, for example, the timing of leaf color change and senescence across different tree species is influenced by network communications about nutrient reallocation and winter preparation strategies. Trees don't just respond individually to environmental cues, they coordinate their responses through fungal connections to optimize community-wide resource conservation. These coordinated community responses create emergent properties that transcend the capabilities of individual species. Forest communities connected by mature fungal networks show greater stability, higher productivity, and better resistance to environmental disturbances compared to less connected or single-species systems. The emergence of community-level intelligence from fungal network connections represents one of the most profound discoveries in modern ecology. We're witnessing the operation of biological systems that process information, make decisions, and coordinate responses across spatial and temporal scales that dwarf human experience. Yet this ancient intelligence operates entirely without the centralized control systems that characterize human organizations. There's no forest manager coordinating resource allocation, no central authority deciding which species should establish where, no master planner designing optimal network architectures. Instead, intelligence emerges from the bottom up, through countless local interactions that create global patterns and behaviors. This decentralized intelligence challenges our assumptions about how complex systems can be organized and managed. The efficiency and resilience of forest networks suggest that distributed decision-making systems might be more robust and adaptable than centralized alternatives, at least for certain types of challenges. The lessons from fungal networks are already influencing fields far beyond forest ecology. Urban planners are studying network architectures to design more resilient infrastructure systems. Computer scientists are developing distributed algorithms inspired by fungal resource allocation strategies. Even economists are exploring how network-mediated cooperation might create more stable and equitable resource distribution systems. As we continue to decode the language of the Wood Wide Web, we're discovering that forests have been conducting experiments in collective intelligence, distributed decision-making, and cooperative resource management for millions of years. The results of these experiments surround us in every healthy forest, quietly demonstrating the power of networked cooperation to create resilient, adaptive, and remarkably intelligent biological systems. The ancient conversations flowing through fungal networks carry lessons that extend far beyond the forest floor. They offer glimpses of alternative ways of organizing complex systems, managing resources, and creating resilient communities. In our increasingly connected but often fragmented world, the wisdom of the Wood Wide Web provides both inspiration and practical guidance for building more sustainable and cooperative human societies. The trees continue their underground conversations, processing information, sharing resources, and coordinating responses with a sophistication that we're only beginning to appreciate. Each forest walk now carries the awareness that we're witnessing one of Earth's most elegant experiments in collective intelligence, quietly demonstrating that cooperation and communication can create emergent capabilities far beyond the sum of individual parts. But the story of the Wood Wide Web is far from complete. New discoveries continue to emerge from laboratories and forest research sites around the world, each one adding new layers of complexity and wonder to our understanding of these remarkable underground networks. The conversation between trees continues, and we're finally learning not just to listen, but to participate in ways that honor the ancient wisdom flowing beneath our feet. What makes this ancient network even more remarkable is how it responds to human interference, often in ways that completely contradict our expectations. When logging companies began implementing what seemed like more sustainable harvesting practices, selectively cutting trees while leaving others standing, they assumed they were preserving the forest ecosystem. But the underground networks told a different story entirely. Dr. Suzanne Simard's team discovered that these selective harvests were inadvertently severing critical network connections, isolating surviving trees from the fungal highways that had sustained them for decades. Trees that had never experienced resource stress suddenly found themselves cut off from the underground support systems they'd relied upon their entire lives. It was like disconnecting a computer from the internet while expecting it to continue accessing online resources. The surviving trees, despite having adequate space and sunlight, began showing signs of distress within months. Their growth rates slowed, their resistance to pests declined, and many began producing stress hormones typically associated with drought or disease. They weren't dying from direct human damage, but from the severing of connections that had been invisible to forest managers who focused only on what they could see above ground. These observations led to a profound shift in how some forestry operations approach tree harvesting. Instead of thinking about individual trees as isolated units, forward-thinking forest managers began mapping the underground networks before making any cuts. They started identifying mother trees and network hubs, designing harvest patterns that preserved critical fungal highways, even as they removed individual trees for timber. Some experimental harvesting operations now employ what researchers call network-sensitive logging, where cutting patterns are designed to maintain underground connectivity across harvest areas. Early results suggest that forests managed with network awareness recover faster, maintain higher biodiversity, and sustain better long-term productivity compared to traditionally managed areas. The healing capacity of these networks also reveals itself in unexpected ways. In areas where fungal connections have been disrupted but not completely destroyed, the networks can slowly rebuild themselves, extending new connections across damaged zones like biological bridges spanning ecological gaps. This recovery process can take decades, but it demonstrates the remarkable persistence and adaptability of these underground systems. Researchers studying forest recovery after various disturbances have found that the speed of ecosystem restoration correlates strongly with the integrity of surviving fungal networks. Areas where underground connections remained largely intact can recover from major disturbances like fires or storms within a few years. But locations where network connections were severely damaged might take decades to re-establish the underground infrastructure necessary for healthy forest function. This discovery has transformed approaches to post-disturbance forest management. Instead of rushing to replant trees immediately after fires or storms, some managers now focus first on assessing and protecting surviving network infrastructure. They've learned that a few surviving trees connected to intact fungal networks can facilitate forest recovery far more effectively than thousands of planted seedlings lacking network connections. The role of these networks in carbon storage has also revealed surprises that are reshaping our understanding of climate change mitigation. While scientists have long known that forests store significant amounts of carbon in their biomass, recent research has shown that the underground fungal networks themselves represent massive carbon reservoirs that had been largely overlooked. The fungal biomass in forest soils can account for up to 70% of the total living carbon in some ecosystems, rivaling or exceeding the carbon stored in above-ground tree biomass. These fungal networks don't just move carbon around, they actively sequester it in forms that can persist in soils for decades or centuries. When networks are disrupted, this stored carbon can be rapidly released back to the atmosphere, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions in ways that traditional forest carbon accounting methods completely missed. Dr. Keers from the University of Amsterdam has calculated that protecting existing fungal networks might be one of the most cost-effective approaches to carbon sequestration available today. Rather than focusing solely on planting new trees, climate mitigation efforts could achieve greater impact by preserving the underground infrastructure that allows forests to store carbon efficiently over long time periods. This realization is influencing international climate policy discussions, where forest protection strategies are beginning to account for below-ground carbon storage and the role of fungal networks in maintaining soil carbon pools. Some carbon offset programs now include provisions for protecting network integrity, recognizing that forest carbon storage depends as much on underground connections as on above-ground biomass. The networks also play crucial roles in water cycle regulation that extend far beyond individual forest boundaries. The fungal threads that connect trees create pathways for water movement that can redistribute precipitation across entire watersheds. During heavy rainfall events, networks can channel excess water away from saturated areas toward zones where trees are experiencing drought stress. This natural water management system operates with a precision that puts human engineering projects to shame. The networks can detect moisture gradients across landscapes and direct water flow to where it's most needed, maintaining optimal soil moisture levels across diverse topographic conditions. They create what hydrologists are beginning to recognize as biological watersheds that operate independently of surface drainage patterns. When these network-mediated water-sharing systems are disrupted by deforestation or land conversion, the impacts can be felt across entire regional water cycles. Areas that historically maintained stable water supplies through network connections can suddenly experience increased flooding during wet periods and more severe droughts during dry spells. Some innovative watershed management programs are now incorporating fungal network protection into their planning processes. Instead of relying solely on engineered solutions like dams and irrigation systems, these programs recognize that maintaining healthy forest networks can provide more resilient and cost-effective water management across entire river basins. Our understanding of how these networks influence regional climate patterns continues to evolve as researchers develop new methods for studying forest-atmosphere interactions. The networks don't just respond to climate conditions, they actively modify them through coordinated changes in tree behavior that can influence local temperature, humidity, and precipitation patterns. When networks coordinate mass leaf-out events across entire forests, they can create regional cooling effects that moderate temperature extremes. When they synchronize autumn senescence, they can influence regional moisture patterns and storm development. The networks essentially allow forests to participate actively in local climate regulation, rather than simply responding passively to atmospheric conditions. These climate modification effects operate on scales ranging from local microclimates to regional weather patterns. Forests with intact networks show different temperature and moisture profiles compared to fragmented areas, creating climate refugia that can support species and ecological processes even as broader regional conditions become less favorable. The implications for climate adaptation strategies are profound. Instead of viewing forests simply as carbon sinks or biodiversity reserves, Climate adaptation planning is beginning to recognize them as active climate management systems whose effectiveness depends critically on maintaining underground network integrity. Urban planners are also discovering applications for network principles in designing more resilient cities. Some experimental urban forestry projects are attempting to create fungal networks that connect street trees, park trees, and remnant forest patches within metropolitan areas. Early results suggest that networked urban trees show better survival rates, require less maintenance, and provide more effective air quality and temperature regulation services. The therapeutic effects of spending time in forests connected by healthy fungal networks are also attracting scientific attention. Researchers studying forest bathing and nature therapy have found that people report greater stress reduction and mood improvement when spending time in forests with intact underground networks compared to fragmented or artificially managed areas. The chemical compounds that flow through fungal networks include many volatile organic compounds that become airborne and can be inhaled by forest visitors. Some of these compounds have documented anti-inflammatory and mood-regulating effects on human physiology. It's as if the forest's underground communication system extends into the air we breathe, creating therapeutic benefits that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. These discoveries are influencing the design of therapeutic gardens and healing landscapes in healthcare settings. Some hospitals and treatment centers are incorporating network-connected trees and native plant communities into their healing environments, recognizing that the underground connections may be as important as the visible vegetation in creating therapeutic benefits. The educational implications of network research are equally transformative. Understanding that forests operate as integrated communities rather than collections of competing individuals challenges fundamental assumptions about how natural systems work. This shift in perspective influences everything from elementary science education to graduate research programs in ecology and environmental science. Children who learn about forest networks often develop more collaborative and systems-oriented approaches to problem solving compared to those taught traditional competitive models of nature. They begin to see cooperation and interdependence as fundamental aspects of natural systems rather than exceptions to the rule of competition. Environmental education programs that include hands-on exploration of fungal networks help students develop more nuanced understanding of ecological relationships and human impacts on natural systems. When students can visualize the underground connections that link trees across landscapes, they develop better intuition about how local actions can have distant consequences. The artistic and cultural impacts of network research are also beginning to emerge as artists, writers, and filmmakers find inspiration in the hidden connections that bind forest communities together. The Wood Wide Web has inspired sculptures that visualize underground networks, musical compositions that translate network rhythms into sound, and literary works that explore themes of connection and communication in natural systems. Indigenous knowledge systems have long recognized the interconnected nature of forest communities, and network research is creating new opportunities for dialogue between traditional ecological knowledge and contemporary science. Many indigenous cultures have sophisticated understanding of forest relationships that align closely with recent scientific discoveries about fungal networks. These collaborations between indigenous knowledge holders and network researchers are revealing additional layers of forest communication that hadn't been recognized by Western science. Traditional practices for forest management, plant cultivation, and ecosystem restoration often incorporate understanding of underground connections that modern research is only beginning to appreciate. The integration of indigenous knowledge with network science is leading to more holistic approaches to forest research and management that honor both traditional wisdom and contemporary scientific methods. These collaborative approaches often produce more effective and culturally appropriate solutions to forest conservation and restoration challenges. As our exploration of the Wood Wide Web continues to deepen, we're discovering that these underground networks represent far more than just biological curiosities. They offer profound insights into alternative ways of organizing complex systems, managing resources, and creating resilient communities that remain stable across long time periods. The principles that govern fungal network function, cooperation balanced with healthy competition, distributed decision-making, resource sharing based on need and contribution, long-term thinking that spans multiple generations, these principles offer guidance for addressing some of humanity's most pressing challenges. From climate change mitigation to sustainable resource management, from urban planning to international cooperation, the wisdom encoded in fungal networks provides templates for creating more resilient and equitable human systems. The underground conversations that connect forest communities demonstrate that cooperation and mutual support can create emergent capabilities that far exceed what individual entities can achieve in isolation. The story of how trees talk to each other underground continues to unfold with each research season, revealing new secrets about these ancient communication systems that have been operating beneath our feet for millions of years. Every forest walk now carries the awareness that we're witnessing one of Earth's most sophisticated examples of collective intelligence and cooperative resource management. The networks remind us that life on Earth has always been fundamentally interconnected, that individual success depends on community health, and that the most resilient systems are those that balance individual needs with collective benefits. In a world that often emphasizes competition and individual achievement, the Wood Wide Web whispers a different story about the power of connection, communication, and mutual support. As we continue to decode the language of trees and fungi, we're not just learning about forest ecology, we're discovering principles for living that could transform how human communities organize themselves, share resources, and work together to create a more sustainable and cooperative world. The ancient conversations flowing through fungal networks carry messages that extend far beyond the boundaries of any forest, offering wisdom about connection and cooperation that speaks to the deepest challenges of our time. The trees are still talking, the networks are still humming with activity, and we're only beginning to understand the full scope of the conversations happening beneath our feet. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, revealing the Wood Wide Web as one of the most elegant and sophisticated communication systems on our planet. In laboratories around the world, scientists are developing increasingly sophisticated tools to eavesdrop on these underground conversations. Using techniques that would have seemed like science fiction just a few decades ago, researchers can now trace individual molecules as they travel through fungal highways, decode electrical signals pulsing through high-fall networks, and even listen to the acoustic vibrations that some fungi produce as they grow and communicate. Dr. Monica Gagliano's pioneering work in plant bioacoustics has revealed that some fungi produce clicking sounds at frequencies just beyond human hearing. These acoustic signals appear to coordinate growth patterns and resource allocation across network nodes, adding yet another layer to the communication systems operating beneath forest floors. When researchers play recordings of these fungal clicks to isolated seedlings, the young trees show improved growth and stress resistance, suggesting that sound itself may be part of the ancient language that connects forest communities. The molecular techniques that allow scientists to trace chemical signals through networks have revealed a vocabulary of communication that dwarfs human language in its complexity. Researchers have identified hundreds of distinct chemical compounds that trees can release into fungal networks, each one carrying specific information about the sender's condition, needs, or environmental observations. Some molecules signal immediate distress, others indicate seasonal changes, and still others carry information about soil conditions or the presence of beneficial bacteria. This chemical vocabulary appears to be learned rather than purely instinctual. Young trees connected to experience networks gradually acquire more sophisticated signaling abilities, expanding their chemical vocabulary as they mature within the fungal community. It's as if the forest provides language lessons to new residents, teaching them the complex grammar of chemical communication that allows effective participation in network activities. The electrical signals that flow through fungal networks operate on multiple frequencies simultaneously, creating what researchers describe as biological multiplexing systems that can carry different types of information on separate channels. Low-frequency pulses might coordinate seasonal behaviors across entire forest communities, while higher-frequency signals handle immediate coordination of defensive responses or resource allocation decisions. These electrical communications systems show remarkable similarities to the neural networks in animal brains, leading some researchers to investigate whether fungal networks might possess forms of memory and learning that operate on principles similar to animal cognition. When networks encounter novel environmental challenges, their electrical activity patterns change in ways that suggest active information processing and problem-solving, rather than simple reflexive responses. The quantum effects that appear to operate within some fungal networks add yet another layer of mystery to these communication systems. Recent research has detected quantum coherence in some fungal structures, suggesting that these networks might utilize quantum mechanical processes to enhance their information processing capabilities. While this research is still in its early stages, it raises fascinating questions about whether biological systems can harness quantum effects for computational purposes. The seasonal rhythms of network communication create temporal patterns that coordinate forest-wide activities across scales ranging from daily cycles to multi-year climate patterns. During spring emergence, networks pulse with increased electrical activity as they coordinate leaf-out timing across different species. Summer months show steady patterns of resource sharing and growth coordination, while autumn brings waves of chemical signals that synchronize senescence and nutrient reallocation processes. These seasonal communication patterns appear to be influenced by astronomical cycles beyond simple day-length changes. Some networks show activity patterns that correlate with lunar cycles, solar magnetic field variations, and even long-term climate oscillations like El Niño cycles. The networks seem to integrate environmental information across multiple timescales, creating biological calendars that help forest communities anticipate and prepare for environmental changes. The mathematical principles that govern network architecture reveal optimization strategies that would impress any engineer. Fungal networks consistently develop structures that minimize energy costs while maximizing information flow and resource distribution efficiency. They achieve these optimal configurations without central planning or design, through self-organizing processes that balance local constraints with global network performance. Computer scientists studying these biological optimization strategies have developed new algorithms inspired by fungal network growth patterns. These bio-inspired algorithms show remarkable efficiency at solving complex routing and resource allocation problems, often outperforming traditional computational approaches. The networks demonstrate that highly efficient systems can emerge from simple local rules, followed by millions of individual components. The redundancy built into fungal networks creates fault tolerance that exceeds most human-designed systems. When individual connections are severed or nodes are damaged, the networks can rapidly reroute information and resources through alternative pathways. This resilience emerges from the highly interconnected nature of the networks, where multiple pathways typically exist between any two nodes. Studies of network recovery after major disturbances reveal self-healing capabilities that operate on multiple timescales. Immediate responses involve rerouting through existing alternative pathways, while longer-term recovery includes the growth of new connections that restore full network functionality. Some networks can recover from losing up to 80% of their connections while maintaining basic communication and resource-sharing capabilities. The evolutionary history of these networks extends back hundreds of millions of years, making them among the oldest and most persistent communication systems on Earth. Fossil evidence suggests that similar fungal networks existed during the earliest colonization of land by plants, implying that cooperation through fungal partnerships was crucial for terrestrial life from its very beginnings. The co-evolution of plants and fungi through geological time has created increasingly sophisticated partnership arrangements that benefit both participants. Modern networks represent the culmination of hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary refinement, creating systems of stunning elegance and efficiency that operate across spatial scales, from microscopic to continental. The genetic mechanisms that allow plants and fungi to recognize and communicate with each other involve sophisticated molecular recognition systems that can distinguish between beneficial partners and potential threats. Trees can assess the quality and reliability of fungal partners, preferentially forming connections with fungi that provide better resource returns or more reliable communication services. This partner selection process creates evolutionary pressures that favor honest communication and fair resource exchange within networks. Fungi that cheat or provide poor service risk being excluded from valuable tree partnerships, while trees that fail to contribute adequately to network resources may find their access to network benefits reduced. The metabolic integration between trees and fungi in mature networks becomes so complete that it challenges traditional definitions of individual organisms. Some researchers argue that tree-fungal partnerships represent functional units that should be considered as single organisms rather than separate entities engaged in cooperation. The metabolic processes of trees and their fungal partners become so intertwined that neither can survive independently once mature partnerships are established. This metabolic integration extends to immune system coordination, where trees and fungi share information about pathogens and coordinate defensive responses. The networks can essentially vaccinate entire forest communities against recurring threats by sharing chemical signatures of successful defensive strategies. When one tree successfully repels a particular pathogen, the chemical markers of that success can be distributed through the network, priming other trees to deploy similar defenses if needed. The role of these networks in mediating plant reproduction adds another dimension to their community coordination functions. Networks can influence the timing and success of flowering, pollination, and seed production across forest communities. They coordinate these reproductive activities to optimize resource utilization and minimize competition between species that might otherwise interfere with each other's reproductive success. Some networks appear to coordinate massed seeding events, where multiple tree species simultaneously produce large seed crops at irregular intervals. These coordinated reproduction events can overwhelm seed predators and increase the survival chances of the next tree generation. The underground networks provide the communication infrastructure that allows this coordination to occur across entire forest landscapes. The influence of networks on soil microbial communities creates additional layers of ecological coordination that extend the reach of tree communication systems. The chemical compounds released by trees into fungal networks can influence the growth and activity of bacteria, other fungi, and soil invertebrates, essentially allowing trees to modify their soil environment through network-mediated chemical signaling. These soil modifications can persist long after individual trees die, creating legacy effects that influence the establishment and growth of future plant generations. The networks leave chemical signatures in soils that can guide succession patterns and species composition for decades after major disturbances. It's as if the forest communities write instructions for their successors into the very soil that will support future growth. The discovery of these legacy effects has transformed understanding of forest succession from a simple competitive process to a complex inheritance system where each forest generation receives not just genetic material, but also ecological knowledge and environmental modifications from their predecessors. This multi-generational continuity helps explain the remarkable stability and predictability of forest community development over long time periods. The research techniques that are revealing these network secrets continue to evolve rapidly as new technologies become available. Advanced DNA sequencing methods can now identify and track individual fungal organisms across entire landscapes, revealing network structures and connections with unprecedented precision. Isotopic labeling techniques allow researchers to follow specific molecules as they travel through network pathways, creating detailed maps of resource flows and communication channels. Real-time monitoring systems using networks of sensors embedded in forest soils can detect changes in network activity as they occur, providing insights into how networks respond to environmental changes, seasonal cycles, and disturbance events. These monitoring systems are beginning to reveal the dynamic nature of network operations, showing how communication patterns and resource flows change continuously in response to shifting conditions. The integration of satellite remote sensing with ground-based network monitoring is creating comprehensive pictures of how underground networks influence forest health and productivity across regional scales. Areas with healthy network connectivity show distinct signatures in satellite imagery that correlate with better growth rates, higher resistance to environmental stress, and more stable ecosystem functions. Machine learning algorithms trained on network monitoring data are beginning to predict forest responses to environmental changes with remarkable accuracy. These predictive models incorporate network connectivity, communication patterns, and resource flow data to forecast how forests will respond to climate variations, pest outbreaks, and management interventions. The practical applications of network research continue to expand as land managers develop tools and techniques for incorporating network knowledge into forest management decisions. Network mapping protocols help identify critical connection nodes that should be protected during harvesting operations. Restoration techniques that prioritize network reconstruction show improved success rates compared to traditional tree planting approaches. The economic value of network services is beginning to be quantified as researchers develop methods for assessing the contribution of underground networks to forest productivity, carbon storage, water regulation, and other ecosystem services. These valuations are influencing forest management decisions and conservation priorities, with network integrity becoming a measurable component of forest health assessments. As our journey through the wood wide web draws toward a close, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of even greater discoveries. The underground conversations that connect forest communities represent just one example of the hidden communication networks that operate throughout the natural world. Similar principles of cooperation, resource sharing, and collective intelligence appear in ecosystems ranging from grasslands to coral reefs, suggesting that networked cooperation may be a fundamental organizing principle of life on Earth. The lessons flowing from fungal networks offer hope and guidance for addressing the environmental challenges of our time. They demonstrate that resilient, sustainable systems can emerge from cooperation and mutual support, that collective intelligence can solve complex problems without centralized control, and that long-term stability depends on maintaining the connections that bind communities together. In our increasingly connected, yet often fragmented world, the ancient wisdom of the wood wide web reminds us that true resilience comes not from individual strength, but from the quality of our connections to each other and to the living systems that support us all. The trees continue their patient conversations beneath our feet, offering quiet lessons in cooperation, resilience, and the enduring power of community. The forest is speaking, and we are finally learning to listen. In that listening, we discover not just the secrets of how trees talk to each other underground, but profound truths about how life itself creates the networks of connection and communication that allow communities to thrive across the vast scales of space and time that define our living planet. The more we discover about these ancient networks, the more we realize they're teaching us something profound about the nature of healing itself. When a forest experiences trauma, whether from fire, storm, or human interference, the underground networks don't simply shut down and wait for better times. Instead, they become even more active, pulsing with urgent chemical messages and electrical signals as they coordinate the most remarkable recovery processes on Earth. Dr. Peter Wohlleben observed this phenomenon firsthand in German forests recovering from severe windstorms. Within hours of trees being toppled by hurricane-force winds, the fungal networks began redistributing resources from damaged areas to intact zones, while simultaneously sending out chemical scouts to assess the extent of the destruction. The networks seemed to triage the landscape, identifying which areas could be saved and which needed to be abandoned, all while maintaining communication links that would guide the eventual restoration process. What's particularly fascinating is how these networks remember trauma and use that memory to build resilience for the future. Trees that survive major disturbances don't just recover their previous state, they actually become more robust and better connected than before. The networks appear to learn from each crisis, encoding successful survival strategies into their very structure and passing this hard-won wisdom to future generations through their fungal connections. This biological memory of resilience manifests in ways that continue to surprise researchers. Forest stands that have experienced and recovered from major disturbances show distinctly different network architectures compared to undisturbed areas. They develop more redundant connections, more efficient resource-sharing pathways, and more sophisticated early warning systems. It's as if the forest develops a form of post-traumatic growth, emerging from challenges stronger and more capable than before. The healing process extends beyond simple recovery to active landscape restoration. Networks don't just help damaged forests return to their previous state, they can actually guide the transformation of degraded areas into healthier, more diverse ecosystems. The fungal connections serve as biological highways that allow beneficial organisms to colonize disturbed areas, carrying seeds, spores, and other propagules across landscapes that might otherwise remain barren for decades. Some of the most dramatic examples of network-mediated healing occur in areas affected by industrial pollution or mining activities. In these severely degraded landscapes, where most visible life has been eliminated, fungal networks can persist in the soil, maintaining underground connections that become the foundation for eventual ecosystem recovery. When conditions improve enough to allow plant establishment, these surviving networks can rapidly facilitate colonization by guiding the establishment of new plant communities. The chemical remediation capabilities of fungal networks add another dimension to their healing functions. Many fungi can break down toxic compounds in soils, transforming pollutants into harmless substances through sophisticated biochemical processes. When these detoxifying fungi are connected to tree partners through mycorrhizal networks, they can coordinate landscape-scale cleanup efforts that gradually restore soil health across contaminated areas. Dr. Suzanne Simard's research team has documented cases where networks have facilitated the natural restoration of areas contaminated by industrial activities, heavy metals, and even radioactive materials. The fungi don't just tolerate these toxic conditions, they actively work to neutralize them while simultaneously supporting the establishment of plant communities that can continue the restoration process. The timeframes over which these healing processes operate reveal another remarkable aspect of network intelligence. While some responses occur within hours or days, others unfold over decades or centuries, suggesting that the networks operate with a form of temporal wisdom that spans multiple human generations. They seem to understand that true healing requires patience, that sustainable restoration cannot be rushed, and that the strongest recoveries are those that build slowly and steadily over extended periods. This long-term perspective influences how networks prioritize their healing efforts. Rather than attempting to restore everything simultaneously, they focus their resources on establishing stable foundation communities that can support more complex ecosystems as conditions continue to improve. They create stepping stones of recovery that gradually expand outward from stable nodes, eventually connecting to form larger networks of restored habitat. The role of networks in climate adaptation reveals yet another facet of their healing capabilities. As environmental conditions shift due to climate change, networks don't just help existing forests cope with new conditions, they actively facilitate the migration of species to more suitable habitats. This assisted migration occurs through the gradual extension of network connections across changing landscapes, creating corridors that allow genetic material and ecological knowledge to flow between distant populations. Some of the most compelling evidence for climate-assisted healing comes from mountain ecosystems, where networks are helping tree species track suitable growing conditions as they shift upward in elevation due to warming temperatures. The networks provide crucial support for pioneering individuals that establish in previously unsuitable areas, helping them survive until local conditions become more favorable and sustainable populations can develop. The networks also demonstrate remarkable abilities to buffer communities against climate extremes, essentially providing biological insurance against increasingly unpredictable environmental conditions. During periods of extreme drought, heat, or cold, networks can mobilize resources from across entire landscapes to support stressed communities, helping them survive conditions that would otherwise be lethal. These climate buffering effects operate through mechanisms that are both elegant and practical. Networks can coordinate changes in tree behavior that modify local microclimates, creating cooler, more humid conditions during heat waves, or warmer, more protected conditions during cold snaps. They can also redistribute water resources across watersheds, moving moisture from areas of abundance to zones experiencing drought stress. The healing wisdom embedded in fungal networks extends to their relationships with human communities as well. Indigenous peoples around the world have long recognized the restorative power of healthy forests and have developed management practices that support and enhance network healing functions. These traditional approaches often involve working with natural network patterns rather than against them, supporting the forest's own healing processes rather than attempting to impose external solutions. Modern restoration projects that incorporate indigenous knowledge and network science are achieving remarkable success in healing damaged landscapes. These collaborative approaches recognize that effective restoration requires understanding and supporting the underground connections that will ultimately determine the success or failure of recovery efforts. Some of the most innovative healing applications involve using network principles to restore not just forests, but entire watersheds and regional ecosystems. By identifying and protecting key network nodes and corridors, restoration practitioners can facilitate natural healing processes that extend far beyond the boundaries of any individual project site. The therapeutic effects of spending time in forests with healthy networks have also captured the attention of medical researchers studying the relationship between environmental health and human well-being. People who spend time in forests with intact underground networks report better mood, reduced stress, improved immune function, and faster recovery from illness compared to those who spend time in fragmented or artificially managed landscapes. These health benefits appear to result from a combination of factors, including the complex mixtures of airborne chemicals released by networked forest communities, the acoustic environments created by healthy ecosystems, and perhaps even subtle electromagnetic effects generated by the electrical activity of fungal networks. The forest's underground conversations seem to create conditions that promote healing not just for the ecosystem itself, but for the humans who spend time within it. The medical applications of compounds discovered in fungal networks continue to expand as researchers identify new therapeutic molecules that trees and fungi use in their underground communications. Many of these compounds have anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, or immune-boosting properties that could lead to new treatments for human diseases. The networks are essentially vast pharmaceutical laboratories that have been conducting research and development for millions of years. Urban applications of network healing principles are transforming approaches to city planning and public health. Some cities are experimenting with creating fungal networks that connect urban trees and green spaces, essentially building biological healing infrastructure that can improve air quality, moderate temperatures, and provide therapeutic benefits for urban residents. These urban networks face unique challenges compared to their forest counterparts, including soil compaction, pollution, and fragmentation by infrastructure. But early experiments suggest that even simplified urban networks can provide significant benefits for both tree health and human well-being, creating pockets of biological healing within otherwise harsh urban environments. The agricultural applications of network healing principles are revolutionizing approaches to sustainable farming and land restoration. Some farmers are learning to work with mycorrhizal networks to restore soil health, reduce the need for chemical inputs, and create more resilient agricultural systems that can adapt to changing climate conditions. These agricultural networks can help heal soils damaged by intensive farming practices, rebuild organic matter content, and restore the complex biological communities that support long-term soil fertility. They demonstrate that food production and ecosystem healing can be compatible goals when managed with understanding of underground network dynamics. The economic implications of network healing are beginning to influence policy decisions and investment strategies. Healthy networks provide ecosystem services worth billions of dollars annually in terms of water purification, carbon storage, climate regulation, and natural disaster mitigation. Protecting and restoring these networks represents one of the most cost-effective approaches available for addressing environmental challenges while supporting economic development. Some innovative financing mechanisms are being developed to support network restoration projects, including payments for ecosystem services that recognize the economic value of healthy underground connections. These programs create economic incentives for land managers to protect and restore network integrity, aligning conservation goals with economic interests. The educational dimensions of network healing offer hope for building more sustainable relationships between human communities and natural systems. When people understand that forests are healing networks rather than collections of individual trees, they develop deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of natural systems and their own place within larger ecological communities. Environmental education programs that include hands-on exploration of network healing processes help students develop systems, thinking skills, and ecological empathy that can influence their lifetime choices and career paths. Understanding how natural systems heal themselves provides models for addressing human community challenges and building more resilient social systems. The spiritual and philosophical implications of network healing resonate across many different cultural and religious traditions. The recognition that forests operate as healing communities connected by invisible networks of mutual support aligns with ancient wisdom traditions that emphasize the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of community care in healing processes. Some therapeutic programs now incorporate forest network experiences into treatment approaches for trauma, addiction, and mental health challenges. Spending time in forests with healthy networks while learning about their healing processes can provide powerful metaphors and direct experiences that support human healing journeys. The future applications of network healing science continue to expand as researchers develop new tools for understanding and supporting these natural healing processes. Advanced biotechnology approaches may eventually allow us to design and deploy artificial networks that can accelerate healing in severely damaged ecosystems, essentially providing intensive care for landscapes that cannot recover on their own. But perhaps the most important lesson from studying network healing is that the most effective approaches work with natural processes rather than attempting to replace them. The networks have been perfecting their healing strategies for hundreds of millions of years. And our role is often best understood as supporting and facilitating these natural processes rather than trying to improve upon them. As we walk through forests, whether ancient or recovering, we can now appreciate that we're witnessing one of Earth's most sophisticated healing systems in action. Every step passes over networks that are actively working to maintain, restore, and enhance the health of entire ecosystems. The underground conversations that connect trees are not just about communication and resource sharing. They're about healing, resilience, and the remarkable capacity of life to recover from even the most severe challenges. The networks remind us that healing is not just an individual process, but a community endeavor that requires connection, cooperation, and mutual support. They demonstrate that the strongest recoveries emerge from systems that maintain their connections even during times of crisis, and that true resilience comes from the quality of relationships rather than individual strength alone. In our own human communities, struggling with environmental degradation, social fragmentation, and the collective trauma of rapid global change, the healing wisdom of fungal networks offers both practical guidance and profound hope. They show us that recovery is possible, that damaged systems can become stronger than before, and that the path to healing often runs through the quiet, patient work of rebuilding connections and supporting the natural processes that sustain life. The ancient conversations flowing through forest networks carry messages about healing that extend far beyond the boundaries of any ecosystem. They whisper to us about resilience, recovery, and the enduring power of communities to heal themselves and each other when given the support and time they need to work their quiet magic beneath the surface of our visible world. The trees continue their patient conversations, weaving stories of connection that stretch far beyond what any single forest can contain. And as we reach the end of our gentle journey through this underground universe, perhaps the most remarkable discovery of all is how these ancient networks are quietly teaching us to reimagine our own place in the web of life. When we began this exploration tonight, we started with the simple image of trees standing alone, each one fighting its solitary battle for survival. But now, as we prepare to drift towards sleep, we carry with us a completely different understanding. The forest is not a collection of individuals at all. It's a community, a conversation, a living network of relationships that spans continents and centuries, connecting every tree, every fungus, every particle of soil in an endless exchange of support and information. The fungal threads that weave this underground internet are so fine, so delicate, that we cannot see them with our naked eyes. Yet they carry the weight of entire ecosystems, supporting communities that have endured ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and countless other challenges across geological time. They remind us that the most important connections in life are often invisible, that strength comes not from standing alone, but from the quality of our relationships with others. These networks operate on principles that seem almost magical in their elegance. They share resources not because they have to, but because communities that care for their members prove more resilient than those that don't. They communicate across vast distances, using chemical languages more complex than any human tongue. They remember experiences across generations, passing wisdom from ancient trees to tiny seedlings through connections that transcend individual lifespans. The mother trees that serve as network hubs demonstrate a form of nurturing that extends far beyond their own genetic offspring. They support entire communities, sharing their deep reserves of water and nutrients with neighbours who may be competitors on the surface, but partners in the underground economy of mutual aid. When these ancient giants finally reach the end of their lives, they don't simply fall and decay. They download their accumulated resources to the young trees around them, ensuring that their wisdom and wealth continue to support the community long after their individual presence has faded. There's something deeply comforting about this understanding, especially as we settle into the quiet of evening. The networks show us that cooperation is not just possible but essential, that communities thrive when they balance individual needs with collective well-being, and that the most sustainable systems are those that invest in relationships across generations. The healing properties of these networks offer perhaps the most profound lessons of all. When forests face trauma, Whether from storms, fires, or human interference, the underground connections don't break down. Instead, they become more active, pulsing with urgent messages and mobilizing resources to support recovery. The networks remember these experiences, encoding lessons about resilience that help future generations respond more effectively to similar challenges. This biological wisdom about healing extends far beyond forest boundaries. It suggests that our own communities, whether local neighborhoods or global societies, might become more resilient by adopting similar principles. What would it look like if human communities operated more like fungal networks, sharing resources based on need, communicating openly about challenges and opportunities, and maintaining connections that support collective healing and growth? The networks also remind us about the importance of patience in all forms of healing. While some forest communications happen rapidly, through electrical pulses that travel in minutes, the most profound changes unfold over decades or centuries. The networks understand that sustainable transformation requires time, that the strongest recoveries are those that build slowly and steadily, layer by layer, connection by connection. As climate change and other environmental challenges reshape our world, the fungal networks offer both hope and practical guidance. They demonstrate that living systems can adapt to changing conditions when they maintain their connections and support each other through difficult transitions. They show us that resilience comes not from resisting change, but from maintaining the relationships that allow communities to bend without breaking. The scientific tools that are revealing these network secrets continue to evolve, offering us ever more detailed glimpses into the underground conversations that sustain our forests. But perhaps more important than any specific discovery is the shift in perspective that network research has created. We can no longer see forests as collections of competing individuals. Instead, we recognize them as integrated communities where cooperation and competition coexist in delicate balance, where individual success depends on community health, and where the whole truly becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This understanding is already transforming how we approach forest management, urban planning, agriculture, and restoration ecology, but its implications extend far beyond these practical applications. The networks challenge us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how life works, how communities function, and what it means to be connected to something larger than ourselves. When we walk through forests now, whether in ancient wilderness areas or city parks, we carry the awareness that every step passes over one of Earth's most sophisticated communication systems. The underground conversations connecting trees operate with an elegance and efficiency that puts our human technologies to shame, yet they do so with a gentleness and sustainability that we're only beginning to appreciate. The chemical messages flowing through fungal highways, the electrical pulses coordinating community responses, the seasonal rhythms that synchronize entire ecosystems. All of this happens in silence, beyond the reach of our senses, but fundamental to the health and stability of the living world around us. The networks operate with a humility that might serve as a model for our own communities, doing their essential work without fanfare or recognition, focused entirely on supporting life and fostering connection. Perhaps most remarkably, these ancient systems continue to evolve and adapt, incorporating new species into their networks, responding to environmental changes, and developing ever more sophisticated approaches to community coordination. They demonstrate that intelligence and wisdom can emerge from collective interactions, that learning and memory can exist without centralized control, and that the most resilient systems are those that remain open to growth and change. As we near the end of our exploration, it's worth reflecting on how the story of the Wood Wide Web might change our daily lives. When we tend our gardens, we might think about the fungal partners that support our plants. When we make decisions about where to live or how to travel, we might consider our impact on the underground networks that connect natural communities. When we face challenges in our own relationships and communities, we might remember the patient wisdom of trees that have learned to thrive through centuries of cooperation and mutual support. The networks remind us that we are not separate from nature, but part of it, connected through invisible threads to the vast web of life that sustains our planet. Our actions ripple through these connections in ways we're only beginning to understand, and our well-being depends ultimately on the health of the larger communities of which we are part. The research continues, revealing new secrets with each passing season. Scientists are developing ever more sophisticated tools for eavesdropping on underground conversations, mapping network connections, and understanding the complex relationships that bind forest communities together. Each discovery adds new layers to our appreciation of these remarkable systems, but also reminds us how much we still have to learn. The indigenous peoples who have lived alongside forests for millennia understood these connections long before Western science developed the tools to study them. Their traditional ecological knowledge recognizes trees as relatives, forests as communities, and land as a living system that requires respectful relationship rather than simple extraction. The convergence of indigenous wisdom and contemporary network science offers hope for developing more sustainable approaches to living on Earth. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll carry with you the image of vast underground networks pulsing with life and conversation beneath the quiet Earth. The trees outside your window, whether in distant forests or nearby streets, are part of this ancient communication system, connected through invisible threads to communities that span continents and centuries. The Wood Wide Web continues its patient work, whether we notice it or not, sharing resources, coordinating responses, and maintaining the delicate balances that keep forest ecosystems healthy and resilient. Its conversations flow through chemical highways and electrical pulses, carrying messages of cooperation, healing, and hope across landscapes and through time. These underground networks whisper to us about possibilities we might not have imagined, about forms of community and cooperation that could inspire new approaches to our own challenges. They remind us that the most important connections are often invisible, that true strength comes from relationship rather than isolation, and that healing happens most effectively when communities work together with patience, wisdom, and care. The forest is still talking, still teaching, still demonstrating the quiet power of connection and mutual support. And we, finally learning to listen, discover in their ancient conversations not just scientific wonders, but profound lessons about how to live, how to heal, and how to build communities that can thrive across the vast scales of space and time that define our shared home on this living planet. So, sleep well tonight, knowing that beneath your feet and beyond your dreams, the great conversation continues. Trees are sharing resources with their neighbors, fungi are weaving connections across landscapes, and networks are pulsing with the quiet intelligence that has sustained life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. The Wood Wide Web reminds us that we are never truly alone, that we are part of something larger and more beautiful than we can fully comprehend, and that the conversations that matter most often happen in whispers, in darkness, in the patient exchange of care between beings who understand that their fates are forever intertwined. Sweet dreams, fellow travelers. The trees will keep talking while you rest, weaving their underground stories of connection and community, waiting patiently for tomorrow's discoveries in the endless conversation between forest and fungus, between individual and community, between the visible world above and the hidden networks of wisdom below.